She stood in a room with 1,000 doors. Each one led to a different life, a different body, a different set of challenges she could choose to face. And behind her, a guide waited patiently while she decided which door to open, which lessons to learn, which pain to carry into her next lifetime. The therapist's voice was becoming distant, fading into the background like music playing in another room. Maya felt herself sinking deeper into the chair, her body becoming so relaxed it almost didn't exist anymore. Her thoughts slowed down, quieted, until there was just awareness without the constant noise of thinking. And then she felt movement. Not physical movement. Her body stayed exactly where it was. But her consciousness began to shift, to rise, to expand outward like she was made of air rather than flesh. The office around her dissolved, the walls becoming transparent and then disappearing entirely. She moved upward through layers of reality, each one feeling less solid, less physical, more pure and clear. The weight of being human lifted with each layer she passed through. The concerns and worries of daily life fell away like clothes she no longer needed to wear. And then she arrived in a space that was quite a place but felt more real than any physical location ever had. A space between lives. A space where souls existed when they weren't wearing bodies. A space where she could remember everything she'd forgotten when she was born. Maya Chen had come to Dr. Robert Martinez's office because of a question that wouldn't leave her alone. Why was her life so hard? Not traumatically hard, not disaster-level difficult, but consistently challenging in specific ways that seemed almost designed to push her limits. She struggled with anxiety that had been with her since childhood. She had trouble trusting people, always expecting betrayal even from those who'd never given her reason to doubt. She felt compelled to control every aspect of her life, terrified of chaos and uncertainty. And she had this deep fear of abandonment that made relationships exhausting, always waiting for people to leave, sometimes pushing them away before they could hurt her. Traditional therapy had helped her understand where some of these patterns came from. Childhood experiences with inconsistent caregivers, moments of feeling unsafe, times when the adults in her life had been overwhelmed by their own problems and unable to provide the stability she needed. But understanding where the patterns came from didn't seem to be enough to change them. Maya was 41 years old and still carrying the same fears, still fighting the same battles, still feeling like she was trying to fix something broken inside her that refused to be fixed. A friend had suggested life between lives regression, a specialized type of hypnotherapy that took people not into past lives but into the space between, in the spiritual realm where souls existed when they weren't in bodies, where choices were made about upcoming lifetimes, where lessons were selected, where the difficult aspects of life were chosen deliberately for growth. Maya was skeptical but also desperate. She didn't particularly believe in souls or reincarnation or spiritual realms, but if there was even a chance this could help her understand why her life felt the way it did, she had to try. Now, floating in this space of pure awareness, Maya felt her skepticism dissolving, because this felt real. More real than ordinary reality. More solid, more present, more true. And ahead of her, she could see something forming in the formless space. A structure, a building, a room with 1,000 doors. And standing beside her, waiting patiently, was a presence she recognized even though she'd never consciously met them before. Her guide, the being who had helped her plan this current lifetime before she was born. The one who knew exactly why Maya struggled with anxiety and trust and control, because they'd helped her choose those struggles. Maya's guide didn't have a physical form in any conventional sense, but she perceived them as having a presence, a distinct quality of consciousness that felt warm and deeply familiar. She instinctively thought of her guide as male and gave him the name Marcus, though she understood that souls didn't really have gender and names were just conveniences for her human mind to grasp what couldn't be fully understood. Marcus communicated without words, his meaning flowing directly into her awareness. Welcome back, Maya. You've done well to find your way here while still in Onedid. Most souls don't remember this place until after death, but you were ready to remember, ready to understand why you chose the life you're living. Maya felt a rush of questions. She'd chosen this, the anxiety and fear and constant struggle. Why would she do that to herself? Marcus's presence radiated patient understanding. Come, I'll show you. We'll go back to before you were born, to the time when you were planning this lifetime. You'll see the choices you made and understand the reasons behind them. The scene shifted. Maya found herself in what could only be described as a planning room. It had the quality of a library or study, a space designed for thoughtful consideration and decision-making. But instead of books on shelves, the walls held something else. Doorways. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each one glowing with a different color, emanating a different energy. Marcus gestured toward the doors. Each of these represents a possible life you could choose to incarnate into. Different bodies, different families, different circumstances, different lessons. Before each incarnation, souls come here to review their options and select the life that will provide the experiences they need for growth. Maya moved closer to the nearest door. As she approached, information flooded into her awareness. This door led to a life as a wealthy businessman in Dubai, a life of comfort and material success, but also emptiness and superficiality. The lesson this life offered was about finding meaning beyond material achievement, about learning that status and possessions couldn't fill spiritual voids. She moved to another door. This one led to a life as a single mother in rural India, struggling with poverty and limited opportunities. The lesson was about resilience, about finding joy despite hardship, about the strength that develops when you have no choice but to keep going. Another door showed a life as an athlete, a runner who would experience the heights of Olympic victory and the depths of career-ending injury. Lessons about impermanence, about identity beyond achievement, about grace in loss. Each door was different. Each life offered specific lessons, specific growth opportunities, specific challenges that would force the soul to develop in particular directions. Marcus communicated again. You spent considerable time in this room before your current incarnation. You reviewed many options, discussed them with me and with others in your soul group, and eventually, you made your choices. Would you like to see that process? To remember how you selected the life you're now living? Maya felt both curious and afraid. Part of her wanted to know, but part of her feared what she might discover. What if she found out she'd chosen badly? What if she realized she'd made a terrible mistake? Marcus responded to her unspoken fear. There are no mistakes here, Maya. Only choices that lead to different experiences and different lessons. The life you chose has been difficult in specific ways, yes, but those difficulties are serving exactly the purpose they were meant to serve. The scene shifted again. Maya was still in the room with doors, but now she was seeing herself from before. Her soul self, the consciousness that existed between lifetimes, standing here contemplating options. Her soul self looked different than she expected. Not like the 41-year-old woman she was now, but also not like any specific age or appearance. Just pure consciousness with a quality of personality that was recognizably her. Marcus was there too, in the memory, along with two other beings. One Maya recognized as a member of her soul group, a consciousness she'd incarnated with many times in various configurations. The other was an elder, a being of greater wisdom and experience who served as an advisor for major life decisions. Her soul self was reviewing options, moving from door to door, considering different lives. Some were rejected quickly. The lessons they offered weren't aligned with what she needed to learn. Others she considered more carefully, weighing the challenges against the growth opportunities. She paused at one door that emanated gentle blue and silver light. This life was as a teacher in Sweden, working with children with special needs. It would be a life of service, of patience, of small victories, rather than grand achievements. A quiet life but meaningful. Her soul self considered this option seriously. It was appealing in its gentleness, but eventually, she moved on. Too easy, she communicated to Marcus. I need something that will push me more. I've done many lifetimes of service. I need to learn something different now. She moved to another section of the room where the doors emanated darker, more intense energies. These were lives that involved greater challenge, greater suffering, greater potential for profound growth or painful failure. She stopped at a door that pulsed with mixed energies, dark reds and purples, alongside bright yellows and greens. This was the life she would eventually choose. The life she was now living as Maya Chen. As she stood before this door, information flooded her awareness. She saw the key elements. Born to Chinese immigrant parents in San Francisco in 1983, father working long hours as a restaurant cook, mother struggling with untreated depression, economic insecurity throughout childhood, cultural tensions between American upbringing and Chinese heritage, parents divorcing when she was 12, custody battles, feeling caught between two households, never fully belonging in either. The challenges didn't end in childhood. The life showed struggles with anxiety, starting in adolescence. difficulty forming stable relationships in her 20s, a pattern of attracting partners who were emotionally unavailable or unstable, career uncertainty, financial stress, health issues in her 30s that would force her to slow down and examine her life more deeply. It looked hard, really hard. Her soul self stood before this door for a long time, considering whether she was ready for this level of challenge. The elder spoke, their communication carrying weight and authority. This life will be difficult, but the growth potential is significant. You've completed many lifetimes of external service, of helping others, of living for purposes outside yourself, but you've been avoiding the internal work, the deep healing of old soul patterns that you've carried from many incarnations. This life will force you to face those patterns. The anxiety, the fear of abandonment, the need for control, these aren't new to this lifetime. They're old patterns that have been with you for hundreds of lifetimes, getting reinforced rather than healed, because you keep choosing lives where you can bypass them through external achievement or service. In this life, as Maya Chen, you won't be able to bypass them. The circumstances will push these patterns to the surface repeatedly until you have no choice but to face them, understand them, and heal them. It won't be comfortable. But if you succeed, you'll break patterns that have been limiting your soul's growth for a very long time. Her soul self asked the question. Maya was now wondering, why don't I just choose an easier life and work on these patterns more gently? The elder's response was direct, because you've tried that multiple times. You've chosen moderately challenging lives where you could make some progress on these patterns while still maintaining your comfort zones. And each time, you made minimal progress. The patterns remained because you always found ways to work around them rather than through them. You're ready for a breakthrough, but breakthroughs require crisis, require being pushed to the edge where you have to either transform or break. This life will provide those edges, will create circumstances where your old coping mechanisms stop working and you're forced to develop new ones. Her soul self turned to Marcus. What are the specific lessons I'm supposed to learn? Marcus's response was detailed. Primary lesson is about trust. Trusting yourself, trusting others, trusting the universe. You've carried a deep distrust for many lifetimes, always expecting abandonment, betrayal, chaos. This distrust has protected you from some pain, but has also prevented you from experiencing deep connection and genuine peace. Secondary lesson is about surrender. Letting go of the illusion that you can control life, that you can prevent all bad things from happening if you just manage everything perfectly. Learning to flow with what is, rather than constantly fighting against reality. Third lesson is about self-worth. Understanding that your value doesn't come from achievement, productivity, or being needed by others. Learning to believe you deserve love and good things simply for existing, not for what you do or provide. These lessons will be woven throughout the life. You'll encounter them in relationships, in work, in health challenges, in countless small moments where you have to choose between your old patterns and new possibilities. Maya's soul self stood silently before the door, feeling the weight of the choice. This was going to be hard, harder than anything she'd done before. But the elder and Marcus were right. She'd been avoiding this work for too long. She was ready, or at least, she needed to be ready, because continuing to avoid it wasn't serving her soul's evolution anymore. She turned to the member of her soul group who had been observing the discussion. Will you be there, in this life? The being communicated affirmatively. Yes, I'll incarnate as well, about 10 years before you. We'll meet when you're in your early 20s. I'll come into your life as a friend who will challenge your patterns, who will call you on your self-protective behaviors, who will love you enough to not let you hide. The relationship won't always be easy. There will be conflicts, misunderstandings, times when you'll push me away because I see too much, but I'll be there as long as you need me, as long as it takes for you to learn to trust and be vulnerable. Her soul self felt gratitude for this commitment, having someone from her soul group incarnate alongside her, someone who understood her at a soul level, even if they wouldn't consciously remember it, made the difficult life ahead feel more manageable. She turned back to the door. I choose this. I choose the life as Maya Chen. I choose the challenges and the lessons. I'm ready. Marcus communicated one final important point. Remember that while the overall structure of the life is planned, many details are flexible. You have free will within the framework. You can choose how to respond to challenges. You can choose whether to learn the lessons or avoid them. You can choose to wake up and remember your soul's purpose, or you can stay asleep and just survive the difficulties without understanding them. The life will be challenging regardless. But if you remember why you chose it, if you understand that the challenges are opportunities rather than punishments, the journey becomes meaningful rather than just painful. Her soul self nodded, understanding, and then she moved forward, touching the door. It opened, and light poured through. The light of a new beginning, a new incarnation, a new opportunity to grow and heal and evolve. Maya watched her soul self step through the door, watched the process of preparing for birth, of gradually lowering her vibration to match physical reality, of merging with the tiny forming body in her mother's womb. And she watched as the veil of forgetting descended, as all this knowledge and clarity faded from conscious awareness, buried deep in the subconscious, where it would wait patiently to be remembered. Maya felt overwhelming emotion as she watched her soul self forget everything, forget the planning room, forget Marcus and the Elder, forget the lessons she'd chosen to learn, forget why she'd selected a life that would be so difficult. She saw herself being born, tiny and vulnerable, thrust into a world that was cold and loud and overwhelming after the peaceful spiritual realm. She saw her infant self crying, and now she understood those cries weren't just about physical discomfort. They were about the shock of incarnation, about the soul's grief at being separated from the love and clarity of the spiritual realm, about the terrible forgetting that was part of the human experience. She watched her childhood unfold from this higher perspective, saw her parents struggling with their own unhealed wounds, their own forgotten soul purposes, doing their best but often falling short because they too had forgotten who they really were and why they'd chosen their difficult circumstances. She saw herself as a child, anxious and trying so hard to be good, trying to control her environment, to feel safe, trying to anticipate and prevent abandonment by being perfect, by being needed, by never asking for too much. And she understood now. The anxiety wasn't a defect, it was a symptom, a signal that she was trying to control what couldn't be controlled, that she was operating from fear rather than trust, that she'd forgotten the bigger picture and was lost in the illusion that this physical life was all there was. The abandonment she feared wasn't really about people leaving, it was about the soul's memory of being separated from Source, from the spiritual home where she'd felt completely safe and loved. Physical abandonment triggered that deeper wound, that soul-level grief about incarnation itself. The need for control was her attempt to recreate the certainty and safety she'd known in the spiritual realm, where everything made sense and nothing was random. But she was trying to create that safety through manipulation of external circumstances, which could never work, because the safety she sought could only come from remembering her true nature, from reconnecting with the spiritual truth that she was eternal and could unactually be harmed at a soul level. Maya watched her life continuing to unfold, saw herself in her 20s, repeating patterns with romantic partners, attracting people who were emotionally unavailable because part of her didn't believe she deserved full love and presence, saw herself in her 30s, building a successful career but feeling empty, achieving external validation but still carrying the internal wounds. And then she saw the health crisis. At age 38, Maya had developed severe chronic fatigue that forced her to stop working for almost a year. At the time, it had felt like a disaster, like her body was betraying her, like everything was falling apart. But from this higher perspective, she could see the gift. The illness had forced her to stop achieving, stop performing, stop using external accomplishment to avoid internal work. It had stripped away her ability to maintain the busyness that kept her from feeling, from examining, from confronting what needed to be confronted. During that year of forced rest, Maya had started doing deeper personal work, started therapy that went beyond surface coping strategies, started meditation, started asking bigger questions about meaning and purpose, started, though she didn't realize it at the time, the process of remembering why she'd chosen this difficult life. Marcus's presence manifested beside her again. You're seeing it now, seeing how every challenge you faced was serving the lessons you chose. The absent parents taught you that you have to find validation within yourself rather than from others. The unstable relationships taught you about your patterns so you could recognize and change them. The health crisis forced you to stop running from yourself. None of it was random. None of it was punishment. It was all purposeful, all designed to push you toward the growth you committed to before birth. Maya felt tears streaming down her face, though she wasn't sure if they were physical tears or just the energetic equivalent. She felt grief for all the suffering. All the times she'd felt broken and alone, and like something was fundamentally wrong with her. But she also felt relief, understanding, compassion for herself. She wasn't broken. She was learning difficult lessons that she'd been brave enough to choose, lessons that her soul needed in order to evolve. Marcus communicated one more crucial piece. You're at a choice point now, Maya. You've done enough of the work that you can begin to shift from surviving your lessons to consciously working with them. You can wake up to why you're here. You can remember that you chose this and can choose how to proceed. The challenges won't disappear. The anxiety won't magically vanish. The old patterns won't simply delete themselves, but you can change your relationship with them. Instead of seeing them as problems to fix, you can see them as teachers pointing you toward what needs attention. Instead of fighting against your life, you can work with it, understanding that the friction is where the growth happens. You have about 30 to 40 years left in this incarnation. If you live an average lifespan, you can spend those years continuing to struggle against what is, continuing to feel victimized by circumstances you actually chose. Or you can spend them as a conscious participant in your own growth, appreciating the challenges as opportunities, learning the lessons more quickly and deeply. The choice is yours. It always has been. Maya opened her eyes in Dr. Martinez's office, feeling like she'd been gone for days, even though only about 2 hours had passed. Her face was wet, her body felt simultaneously exhausted and energized, and her mind was spinning, trying to integrate what she'd experienced. Dr. Martinez sat quietly, his expression showing he knew something significant had happened, but waiting for Maya to be ready to talk about it. I chose this, Maya said finally, her voice rough with emotion. I actually chose to have anxiety and trust issues and all of it. I picked it, on purpose. Dr. Martinez nodded. How does that make you feel? Maya thought about it. Angry at first, like why would I do that to myself? But also relieved. Because it means I'm not defective. It means there's a reason for all of it. It's not just bad luck or bad genetics or bad parenting. It's purposeful. She paused, then added, and it makes me feel powerful in a weird way. If I chose this, then I have the ability to work with it consciously. I'm not a victim of circumstances. I'm a soul having the exact experiences I signed up for. Over the following weeks and months, Maya found herself returning again and again to what she'd seen in the planning room. The memory remained vivid, didn't fade the way dreams often do, and it fundamentally changed how she related to her challenges. When anxiety arose, instead of just trying to suppress it or manage it, she would pause and ask herself what the anxiety was trying to teach her. Usually, it was pointing her toward places where she was trying to control what couldn't be controlled, where she needed to practice trust instead. When she noticed herself pushing people away or expecting abandonment, she would remind herself that she'd chosen to work on trust in this lifetime. The pattern arising wasn't a failure, it was an opportunity, a chance to choose differently, to practice vulnerability even when it was scary. The challenges didn't become easy, but they became meaningful. There's a huge difference between suffering that feels pointless and suffering that you understand serves a purpose. The first is crushing. The second is bearable, even transformative. Maya also started paying attention to the synchronicities and guidance that appeared in her life. If she'd chosen this life with help from guides and with support from her soul group, then that support was still available. She just needed to learn to recognize it. She noticed that when she was aligned with her soul's purpose, things flowed, doors opened, the right people appeared, resources showed up. But when she was fighting against her lessons, trying to avoid rather than work through them, everything felt heavy and stuck. About 6 months after her regression session, Maya reconnected with an old friend from college who she'd drifted away from years earlier. As they caught up, Maya felt a deep recognition. This was the soul group member who had promised to incarnate with her, to challenge her and love her through her healing. They'd actually been friends in their early 20s, just as planned, but Maya had pushed her away when the friendship became too intimate, too real. When this friend saw through Maya's defenses and called her out on her patterns, they'd had a falling out and lost touch. Now reconnecting with the wisdom of understanding soul contracts and pre-birth planning, Maya was able to apologize for pushing her friend away, to explain what she'd learned, to rebuild the friendship from a place of consciousness rather than unconscious pattern running. Her friend admitted she'd had her own spiritual awakening journey and had been hoping they'd reconnect. She'd always felt like there was unfinished business between them, a deeper purpose to their friendship that had been interrupted. Together, they began supporting each other's growth more consciously. When Maya would slip into her patterns of control and mistrust, her friend would gently point it out. When her friend struggled with her own lessons around self-expression and boundaries, Maya would offer perspective. It was what soul group members did. They incarnated together to help each other learn, to provide mirrors and challenges and support. Not always comfortable, but incredibly valuable. Maya also changed her approach to therapy. She worked with her therapist to integrate the spiritual insights from her regression with practical psychological tools. She learned somatic practices to release anxiety from her body, learned cognitive techniques to catch and reframe fear-based thoughts, learned relational skills to build trust gradually and safely. But now all of these techniques were in service of soul-level healing rather than just symptom management. She wasn't trying to get rid of her anxiety so she could be normal. She was working with her anxiety to learn the lessons about trust and surrender that she decommitted to learning. The shift in perspective made all the difference. This wasn't about fixing herself, it was about growing herself. And growth, unlike fixing, was something she could embrace rather than resist. 3 years after her regression session, Maya's life looked different in some ways and the same in others. She still experienced anxiety, though less frequently and less intensely. She still had moments of wanting to control everything, though she caught herself more quickly. She still sometimes expected abandonment, though she was learning to challenge those expectations and stay present in relationships even when it was uncomfortable. The external circumstances of her life hadn't changed dramatically. She still had the same job, lived in the same apartment, faced many of the same challenges. But her internal experience was completely different. She had context, she had meaning, she had a sense of purpose and partnership with her own soul. She understood now that spiritual growth wasn't about transcending the human experience and floating off into some detached bliss state. It was about fully engaging with the human experience while remembering the spiritual truth that held it all. Living in the physical world with all its challenges while staying connected to the bigger picture. Maya also started sharing her experience carefully with others who seemed ready to hear it. Not everyone. Some people weren't interested in spiritual perspectives, but those who were struggling with their own patterns, who felt like life was harder than it should be, who wondered why certain challenges kept repeating, she would share what she'd learned. Some people resonated with it immediately, having their own sense that they'd chosen their difficulties for growth. Others were skeptical, which Maya understood because she'd been skeptical too. She didn't try to convince anyone, just offered the perspective and let people take from it what was useful. She also developed a practice of connecting with her guide Marcus through meditation. The connection wasn't as clear as it had been during the regression, but it was real. She could feel his presence, could receive intuitive guidance, could sense when she was aligned with her soul's plan and when she was resisting it. Life became a collaboration between her human self and her soul self, between conscious personality and deeper spiritual purpose. The human part of her still got frustrated and scared and wanted easy answers, but the soul part of her held steady, reminding her why she was here, what she was learning, how every challenge was serving her evolution. Maya understood now that the room with 1,000 doors still existed, that after this lifetime ended she would return there to review and plan again. Would she choose another difficult life, or would she have learned what she needed to learn and be ready for something easier? She didn't know, but she trusted that when the time came, she would make the choice that served her soul's highest good, just like she had this time, even though her human self had forgotten and struggled and wished for something different. Before you were born, you stood in a room filled with possible lives and you chose this one. You picked your parents, your body, your challenges, your gifts. You selected the specific lessons your soul needed to learn in this incarnation. The anxiety, the fear, the patterns that keep repeating, you chose them because they point toward what needs to heal. The life that feels too hard, the circumstances that seem unfair, you selected them knowing they would push you toward growth you couldn't achieve through comfort. You made these choices with guidance, with love, with wisdom about what your soul required, and somewhere deep inside, beneath all the forgetting, you still remember why you're here and what you came to learn. Subscribe for more stories from souls who remembered what they chose.